Welcome back. Gender-based violence activists have expressed concern about the delay in the publishing of the National Register for Sex Offenders. Justice and Constitutional Development Minister Mmamoloko Kubayi says the publishing will not happen anytime soon as legislative reform is needed and data privacy laws need to be upheld. Gender-based violence researcher Lisa Vetten and Build One South Africa spokesperson Roger Solomons joins us now live for more on this. Thank you to both of you for joining us this evening. Lisa, I'd like to start with you and your thoughts on the minister pausing publishing this register.
I think it's absolutely essential. As she's pointed out, her move was preemptive. It did not follow proper legislative processes. I also hope that it will give us the time to step back and think carefully about this decision, because from the base of the research I've done around sex offenders registers and also the quality of justice that is being given to rape complainants, I do not think this is a priority. I think what the minister should be focusing on is why we are putting down 3,000 fewer rape cases for trial than we were doing in 2013-14, and why correspondingly we are convicting fewer rapists as a result. I think the priority should be diagnosing what is going wrong in the investigation and prosecution of rape, rather than focusing on the very, very end point of the tiny proportion of men who are ultimately convicted.
Roger, I'd like to hear your thoughts. As Build One South Africa, you have been calling for the sex offenders register to be published and made public, but you've just heard what Lisa has had to say and why she agrees with it being paused right now. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. As Bold One SA, for the past 2 years, we've been fighting and advocating for this register to be made public. One, because it will serve as a great deterrent. But also we believe that once you commit this crime or abuse, sexual abuse, you give up your right to confidentiality. So in a country currently where the most vulnerable, which are women and children, are not feeling safe, the minister's gone out. She pronounced that she's going to make this list public, and she's given a deadline. So surely before that pronouncement, it should have gone through the legal test. So, you know, government and ministers are just in this habit of backpedaling on minute 99. And now we hear that this list is going to be made available through a phased approach. Is putting a legal team together to review all this legislation. And at the end of the day, we are allowing these monsters and perpetrators to roam our streets, enter our homes, and have access to our children at schools.
Roger, what do you have to say in response? Lisa is saying that this is not where we should be prioritizing. This is not where we should be focused on, but also rather focusing on the entire system and the number of cases that end up going to trial being quite minute compared to those reported and unreported, saying that publishing this offenders list is not necessarily the solution. What do you have to say to that?
Absolutely. I do agree with Lisa to say that holistically the justice system, when it comes to dealing with these perpetrators, it's failed South Africans, it's failed our most vulnerable. So there needs to be a holistic approach and plan. But in the absence of a plan, and in the absence of the minister or department clearly and tangibly showing the seriousness, we feel as BOSA that this is a priority. And if we are saying that this is not a priority, to at least show a positive step towards protecting our most vulnerable, it is a deterrent. We've done studies, we've seen studies, it's working in Florida, it's working in California, it allows community engagement, it allows possible future victims to feel a bit safer. So we are saying absolutely this is a priority. If this is not a priority, what is a priority and what is the seriousness to ensure that we're protecting our most vulnerable in the country?
And Lisa, for you, you've also acknowledged, you know, the backlash or the outstanding vetting applications that the Department of Education, for instance, they presented in the legislature that over 10,000 applicants are still in the vetting system of the educators to find out if they do have a sexual offense against them from the past. I mean, those people could now still be in the system being teaching children as well. What's your view on that, though?
This is, again, I think what should be much more of a priority than focusing on making the list widely accessible to everybody. it is already a requirement by law that if you are somebody who employs people to work with children or people with disabilities, you have to have them checked against the register, both the Child Protection Register and the National Register for Sex Offenders. There are very significant problems happening here. I've worked with NGOs who put in applications in November 2023. They are still waiting to hear back from the department whether or not any of those individuals are on the sex offenders register. So, it's not a good situation. We need to iron out what are the existing problems because those protections are there and they aren't functioning in the way they should. That is where we need to be focusing our attention. We also should be looking at, I think, where some of the loopholes are in relation to children. For instance, if you are self-employed, for example, if you want to send your child to somebody who teaches piano lessons or gives math lessons, they employ themselves. So you can't, obviously they're not going to go and check themselves against the sex offenders register. So that's the kind of thing that should be the priority, because we do know there is a risk that those who predilections run towards children or towards people with disabilities will go and seek employment or will seek out ways in which they can have close contact with them. Those protections already exist and they're not working. We need to understand and fix those as well. That's our priority right now.
And to parents, Lisa, or community members who say, look, I would like to know who lives next door to me. We have seen cases where people who have been on parole and out for crimes against children, sexual crimes against children, repeat those offences. What about those instances?
Well, here I think we have to go and ask very, very serious questions to the Department of Correctional Services. What does this tell us about the quality of their rehabilitation and their ability to assess whether or not anybody is ready for parole? And I think we had recently a very good example of how they're letting us down too. People may have followed the story of Alison Buerter, who was raped and almost left for dead many years ago. The two men who attacked her were put out on parole in 2023, despite a psychologist very clearly saying to the parole board, I do not recommend these two men be released. They are not safe. What did the parole board do? They released them. It required the intervention of a current minister in order to reverse that parole decision. So that's another area we need to ask is, what does this tell us about how good our programs are and our ability to, when experts give us recommendations, why are they being overturned? So that's another area we should be looking at very carefully.
It's a lot of NGOs and, of course, political parties like Build One South Africa as well, who are calling for this thing to be made public and who do really want to know. What would you say to those people who are sitting at home saying, but I do want that register to be made public. I want to know.
Well, look, I suppose the question you want to ask is, why do you want to know? Do you want to go and collect a vigilante group in order to go and chase them out of your community? Do you want to burn down their house? Do you want to go and harass their family? Do you want to follow them in the streets? That's what I'm interested to know, is what is it that you want to do with this information? I fully support the desire to feel safe. Being in South Africa right now is very, very unsafe, and I completely understand the need in order to make people feel safer. But I think by focusing on this as our silver bullet, we are actually going to leave ourselves unsafer by not asking all the other questions, by assuming that the system already works and that therefore the information we get is going to help us. I mean, I think if I can go more broadly, the kinds of things we should also be looking at, and here I think the Child Protection Register is better, is that the Sex Offenders Register will only include those who are convicted in a court of law. And I've already made the point that the conviction rate is low. Many of those who harm others go through disciplinary tribunals at work or go through disciplinary tribunals at school. They will never end up on the Sex Offenders Register because they never went through a court case. So what we should be putting a lot of our energy on is the Child Protection Register, which does actually legislate that those who've been through disciplinary hearings have to have their names included. And so I think there's a whole range of interventions that we could all work on together that would help make the system work more effectively so that we had justice for a greater number of victims. And therefore you could, if you ever ended up having if you have a register that was actually much more comprehensive and protected more people.
Roger, just in closing and briefly, please, you heard Lisa's question there about those people like yourselves who are calling that it should be made public. She's asking, why do you want to know?
Well, we owe it to the most vulnerable in our country. And what we're saying is that when you commit those crimes and sexually, you give up your right to confidentiality. But what we are more importantly calling for is accountability. And being in Parliament and being a party representative is our responsibility for oversight and to hold the minister accountable. She's committed to make the register available at a certain date. On the day, she's backpedaled and said that she's going to review and all of that. But as a party, we are saying that for 2 years we've been fighting this. We've written to the minister. We've applied a request of promotion of access to the Informations Act. We've even, when she released that about nearly over 32,000 is on the register currently, out of a population of over 60 million. We've gone to the NPA to verify. So our role is to ensure that there's accountability and oversight, ultimately ensuring that we protect the most vulnerable. My colleagues like Lisa and very other civil organizations, they can continue advocating what they need to advocate for. But here, the minister needs to account. Here, South Africa is left in the dark. Our communities deserve to know who these perpetrators are that's roaming our streets, driving our kids to school, coaching them at sport, entering our homes. We need to fight this thing. And as Bold One is saying, we're saying we are not angry enough about this issue, and we will continue to ensure that the minister accounts and makes this register public.
Roger, thank you so much. And to my guest as well, Lisa Vetten, thank you so much for joining us this evening.